Okay, I think let's go on here. What I want to just do, and this won't take very long, but it is simply to try and give you some evidence from research about how do civil society organizations make change happen, and how does change happen. What we're talking about is basically significant change, definitely at the national level. Yeah? So we're talking about policy change in a sense. How does that actually happen? Well, the first point is that actually change takes time. That of 8 change processes that I reviewed, where there was significant change that came out of it, the average campaign time was 10.5 years. The quickest case was 3 years. That was in Turkey with family law, particularly on the role of women. The longest was 19 and a half years, and that again was family law in Morocco, again on about women. Both those changes were really significant because in both countries at the time, women were regarded almost like, as in the law, they were almost regarded as men's property in a way. And so the way, so it was a major, major victory for gender equality, these campaigns.
Can I ask just a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Which campaigns take into considerations when you say that 10.5 years is the average?
I'm just saying that there were 8 cases,
8 cases, yeah.
which came from one book in this series, yeah, where they had 8 case studies. And I just looked at, I thought it would be interesting to see how long they took. Shortest was 3, the longest 19 years, average was 10.5. That I think that this is important because often we think in terms of 1-2 years. It has a tremendous amount to do with our financing as well. Yeah? So I think that is definitely a significant fact. The other is that I mean, a starting point is also that civil society organizations, civil society on its own cannot bring about change. It's not, it makes a significant contribution, but it's not enough. That we also tend to think of change as being, or there's a temptation to think of change as being linear, that it follows a line, yeah? That you start your campaign, you do these things, you advocate, you dialogue, and whoop-tee, at the end of the day, you've changed somebody's mind and a new policy comes into being. All the evidence points to the fact that change is cyclical, circular, and that it's of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back type. So that there are setbacks and there are breakthroughs. So that really is like, in a sense, the nature of change, the dynamics of change. The other is that generally in most cases of significant change, there has been a politically opportune moment that has played a decisive role. For example, in the Turkey case, that it happened at a time when Turkey was really keen on being part of the EU. And the government was well aware that they would have to liberalize some of their laws. And it was at this moment that was one of the reasons why they launched the campaign when they did, because it was a politically opportune moment to do so. Because there were other pressures outside of this issue. There were other pressures that were pushing in the right direction. That sudden events is another these are events that are totally beyond our control. That sudden events can have play into the dynamics of change. In the Turkish example, there was a really horrifying rape case, and it was dealt with by the particular Ministry of Law, I think, in an extremely clumsy and incompetent way. And it had a triggering effect on the whole movement, because even many conservative people who were against changing this law, they were so horrified by what had happened and the way that the government had responded to this, that when people analyse this change process, they regard this as being a tipping point, this event, this maverick event. But I mean, sudden changes can work both ways. I mean, they can also work against you and they can work with you. Another really important issue is that most significant change happens at a time when there are leadership changes in the state. It does not necessarily have to be the national leader. It can be a new minister. It could be a new regional director of something. But breakthroughs in change are often associated with leadership changes. I mean, when I was working in Nepal with decentralization, in the ministry, and this actually introduces the next issue as well, that a crucial element of achieving change is reform movements within the state. Nearly all significant change you can find that there was an active reform movement within the state itself, and very often civil society links up with it directly. And the example from Nepal was that the Ministry of Local Development, which was driving the decentralization process, there were two cliques, one against decentralization and one for it. And it was crucial that the minister and the secretary, it was crucial for our work that they were from the for decentralization clique. And we put in a tremendous amount of work lobbying that it should be those two people who got the positions, and luckily they did. If it had been the other way, if it had gone the other way, we could more or less have stopped working for the next 3 or 4 years, because a lot of our initiatives would simply not really get anywhere. And then the final one is that, international fora and pressure also plays a significant but not decisive role. And what the evidence is showing is that change happens, it's a combination of these events and issues that push through a change process. Some of which one has some control over, and other things that one doesn't. And then on the other side, we've got, this is like dynamics of change, and then this side we've got the dynamics of strategy. So what strategies have civil society organizations used? What strategies are effective? That many successful campaigns are single-issue campaigns. Yeah, it's focused on a clear single issue. You may remember in South Africa that Mbeki had this crazy idea about the AIDS epidemic. Yeah, the AIDS. Mbeki, the president, had this idea that it was Americans who'd infected the world with it, or I can't remember what it was anyway, but it was completely different from most mainstream thought. And there was a campaign which was focused on retrovirals, which Mbeki's posture basically sort of said, you know, there's no need for retrovirals because it's just not relevant. It's the drugs. There's special drugs that do actually stop AIDS. Yeah. And there was a campaign, and the campaign was simply focused on access to retrovirals. And in appeal, it had broad appeal: black, white, poor, rich. It was a single clear issue that cut right across all aspects of society. And that has been identified as being a factor in successful campaigns. Another factor is...
what was the factor?
a single issue
okay,
case.
A single issue case is the factor. Yeah, okay.
Something that's clearly and easy to understand and has wide appeal. The next one is mass mobilization from below. That you mobilize the local levels in a big way. That they're involved. Another one is that there are alliances, that organizations form alliances or coalitions with each other. So it's not just a single organization, but it's many joining together, particularly at the national level. Another factor is skilled supporters, that you have skilled people on board, that you have professional advocacy experts, specialists with skills and research capabilities, that you can maybe attract high-profile public figures, Bono, for example, I don't know how high-profile he is anymore, but that you can bring somebody who is known nationally into the campaign.
Have you communicated all these things to the campaign? Okay. I mean, it's really cool. I'm just...
That framing, we've talked about framing. I mean, all successful campaigns were good at framing. And you know, this way about having a local message, a national message, a global message, and interpreting them, or maybe the strategies are different at the local level and the national level and the global level, and the framing is different. Yeah.
Can I just ask, well, to me there's a big difference in the campaign whether you choose a high-profile person and a skilled person, sort of, and I mean, I don't know, doesn't that change the campaign a lot? Whether, I mean, the legitimacy of the campaign, which kind of person you put into focus? I mean, having Rihanna support some case and having some famous scientists. I mean, so in what way?
Definitely, yeah.
But it's just a matter of bringing some sort of public attention. That's the main point about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like that every campaign should do all of these things. It's just sort of research has sort of indicated that campaigns that do have some of these things have been successful. Because every campaign will be different, and it would be very difficult to do all of those things, I think.
However, it's also about using, for instance, like scientific knowledge. Like, for instance, now with the tax power campaign, we have like really background knowledge, really well researched. I mean, so it's not just about using the pop idol or something like that, but it's like making such a strong, clear message, but set from different perspectives and framed from different angles that makes it even stronger to back it up. That's my...
And maybe, I mean, like we've been using Huxi Bach. Yeah. And I mean, he's also a popular figure, but he's not a singer. I mean, he's just popular in another way. You don't have to always compromise.
Isn't it just a question of strategy?
Yeah.
Like, skill support or whatever is most useful for whatever campaign you have.
The fifth one, campaigns that focus on bottom-up and top-down at the same time, so that they think this way and this way. The Global Campaign for Education is cited as having been particularly good at doing that. That they constantly focused on making sure that things were happening at the local level as well as the global level. And one of the ways they did this was this Education Week that they hold it every year. And they have a lot of stuff happening at the local level which links up to the national level, and they also have things happening globally as well, all happening in the same week. I mean, education, you could say that's also a great single issue. I mean, that one of the reasons why perhaps the Global Campaign for Education has been so successful is that it is a single issue that has broad appeal to more or less everybody, really. There are very strong national constituencies in place already, as it is a very important national thing anyway. And then the final one that I put on here is that campaigns that are prepared for contestation, in other words, prepared for conflict, they tend to be more successful, because there are some campaigns which, I mean, it depends on what the issue is, but some issues are definitely, there's a conflict lurking in them. And there are some organisations that sort of acknowledge that up front and sort of say, we know that there is going to be conflict. And how do we best deal with that? And there are some organisations that tend to sort of deny it and sort of say, well, I mean, our approach is to dialogue, to negotiate, and to hold sort of peaceful rallies, and I'm sure it'll be successful. And then maybe they run into some difficulties where a protest turns violent, some of their supporters get badly hurt, and if they're not prepared for it beforehand, they tend to collapse, according to the evidence. I mean, of course, it depends on the issue, but I mean, for example, I mean, being prepared, I mean, a practical example of that was in Uganda, at the district level. This is an old MS project. It actually revealed quite serious corruption from district level officials. I mean, these are big guys. And the case had broken, and it was in the public domain, and the leader of the campaign received threats that he would be murdered and his family would be murdered. So quite serious stuff. But they had thought it through, and they immediately set in motion some plans that they had already, which one was to bus in a whole lot of journalists and other supporters from the national level who surrounded his house to sort of protect it, and draw a high profile to it. Alert the international press as to what was happening, go to the police chief in the capital and sort of say, look, there's a citizen here who needs protection. Why are the local police not doing this? And this, because they were prepared for this, it passed off okay, without it developing further than that, and it did end up with prosecutions. Yeah, so that was, so it's an attempt to sort of say, you know, when we keep going back to the right at the beginning, we talked about this morning our theory of change. Yeah? So it's just trying to add a little bit more to it, that yes, our theory of change is people's agency. People taking action through their organisations and their associations. But there are a number of other things that we need to think about in carrying out change. I think the leadership one and this reform movements within the state are pretty interesting, actually. That in most cases of where we do end in policy change, there are significant groups within the state who are also keen to see that change happen, and that civil society links up in various different ways.
Thank you.
Well, that was it.
Yeah, well done. Do you have a few questions before we start working with this in specific?